From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world.
Ah, yes, of course. While Donald Trump was running for president, he claimed many times that the world just doesn't respect us anymore, and that when I'm president, the world will finally respect the United States. And it's not even a month into his presidency, and already the opposite is true. In fact, support for the US from Canadians is plummeting. I'm going to get to a couple different sources for that information. That also includes, in one case, a couple of other countries, as well as just some examples here of why this is the case. And some of this is going to be obvious. But first, I want to show you these are two clips, both shared yesterday, from one with Trump's interview with Fox, another when he was talking to the press, and where he reiterated again these comments about Canada.
You know, the Prime Minister said this weekend to a group of Canadian businessmen, he was at a private meeting, he said that your wish for Canada to be the 51st state is a, quote, real thing. Is it a real thing?
Yeah, it is. I think Canada would be much better off being a 51st state because we lose $200 billion a year with Canada, and I'm not going to let that happen. Canada, we'll see what happens with Canada, but the people of Canada would be paying less than half of the tax. If you look at the tax, they're going to be paying less than half the tax. They don't pay very much for military, and the reason they don't pay much is they assume that we're going to protect them. That's not an assumption they can make.
There is so much stupid in just those two clips alone that it is impossible to address all of that. On the point of the military, Canada is not invested in getting into pointless wars around the world. We're not interested in invading foreign lands the way that the American past governments have. Maybe that has more to do with it than a worry about who's angry at Canada. Angry enough to invade, like the only threat right now appears to be America. That appears to be the real threat. So this idea that we are somehow terrible neighbors. Can you think of another example with as large of a border as Canada has with the US? Think of another example where there is a neighbor as friendly, as welcoming, as helpful as Canada is to the US. Is there another example like that in the world? It is just, it's wild to witness all of this provoking of Canada and these attempts to these attempts to discuss the annexation of Canada. It's so disgusting. I'm going to get to Americans' feelings on this as well, because you may be surprised. Americans also not interested in annexing other countries, despite the amount of money poured into defense contractors, just complete waste. Yeah, Canada we are really interested in going bankrupt over medical bills. We are really interested in having banks steal our money and having our homes foreclosed on. We can't wait to become Americans. Get the hell out of here. Now, this is the first clear example of how Trump has impacted Canadian politics just generally, is the amount of love that the Liberal Party is now seeing. We're talking about a party that has been in power with Trudeau as the Prime Minister since 2015. So it's almost been 10 years. It'll be 10 years this fall. So people naturally get tired of the same people in power for so long, even if they have done some good things that they like. People are tired of Trudeau for many reasons. But since Trump's inauguration, every single pollster is showing an uptick in Liberal support, be it from Abacus data showing the support for the Liberal Party growing here while the Conservatives are dropping. This is Ecos polling, again, showing a massive uptick here for the Liberals while the Conservatives drop. This is Ipsos, again, showing Liberal Party support increasing while the Conservatives are dropping. Across the board, there is growing support for the Liberal Party that has been in power since 2015. Part of this also you can attribute to the fact that Trudeau is stepping down for a leadership race. So there is less of the, I guess, negativity that people had towards Trudeau being put on the Liberal Party generally. But let's be real here. This has more to do with the fact that Trump is doing what he is doing. And you have Pierre Poilievre as the leader of the Conservative Party, once very closely tied with many in Trump's orbit. Elon Musk is, you could argue, Pierre Poilievre's biggest American booster. He has been online again and again, quote tweeting his Pierre Poilievre speeches saying, "Great job. I agree. This is fantastic. He should be the leader." When that is one of your closest American allies, Elon Musk, can people really trust Pierre Poilievre to lead Canada forward and ensure that Canada stays Canada? So people are, slowly becoming aware of this. Let's be clear. The Tories are still leading here in all these polls, but the trend is showing that if this all continues, the Liberals could actually potentially form government in the next election. Now, this gets us to Canada's favorability toward the U.S. This is from Morning Consult, showcasing here just a dramatic drop. I don't even really have to explain this one. The drop began when Trump won in November. I think we were all, most Canadians, a little stunned that Americans would once again elect that clown. So favorability dropped there. And then once the inauguration hit, it was just, we're at what, minus 20 now? So regardless, it is dropping. And this appears to be the case in other countries as well. So in Colombia, favorability towards the U.S. also plummeting since the inauguration. Mexico, favorability towards the U.S. plummeting since the inauguration. Brazil, another example here, plummeting. I would love to see the data from all countries. I want to see if there's one example where it's gone the opposite direction. Because it's possible, maybe some country around the world is like, you know what? Yes, Trump destabilizing everything, tearing up all these relationships that he had. This is a good thing for the world and stability in our lives. But I have a hard time believing anybody thinks that. So this idea, oh, we're not respected anymore, but when I'm in, it's going to change. No, the complete opposite is actually happening. Now, this also extends to Canadian consumer behavior. So Abacus Data has a great breakdown here. I'll link to this below the video as well in case you want to go through it. But they polled people on this stuff. 42% of Canadians say, I will absolutely do everything I can to not purchase anything made in the United States or from American companies. They also asked, in the past few days, have you considered or not considered doing the following? So 84% say buy more Canadian-made products. 34% say they canceled a trip to the U.S. I know I haven't canceled a trip, but trips that I have considered taking, I am definitely now not going to take as long as Trump is president. And 32% say, have you considered or considered canceling streaming services? I know I've canceled Netflix. It's possible I was going to do that anyways at some point, but I did it in the midst of all the tariff talk. I'm like, you know what? I can do my part. No more Netflix. So that is one example. The Canadian-made products, though, or Canadian-made products, or restaurants. This is something that is going to require a little more Canadian education. I think a lot of Canadians aren't necessarily aware of everything that is or isn't Canadian, especially as it applies to groceries. There are stuff that I walk by, I had no idea, was Canadian made because it isn't really advertised as such. I'm going to get to later on. There's a petition going around. I'm sure there's many petitions like this that is an attempt to try and push forward the idea more of labeling what is and isn't Canadian made so people are more aware. But there are also things like restaurants. Boston Pizza is a Canadian chain. Lone Star Texas Grill is a Canadian chain. Baton Rouge Steakhouse is a Canadian chain. Montana's is a Canadian chain. So there are all these, for some reason, Canadian chains named after American states and cities. It's a little ridiculous, but stuff like that, people also, I think, aren't really aware that they're Canadian. That said, if you can go to a local restaurant not necessarily a chain or, local grocery stores, if those are in your area, then I would suggest doing that over going to, the big corporate chain. I don't think necessarily, giving more money to Boston Pizza is the way to com- combat what Trump is doing here. That said, if you're going to choose between, I don't know, McDonald's and Harvey's, I think Harvey's is Canadian still. Maybe it's not. Forget it. If you're gonna, if there is, 'cause there's things like Tim Hortons. Tim Hortons is owned by a Brazilian company. Now, to be fair, it's not American, so still. But Tim Hortons used to be like, this is the Canadian chain, and I think like 20 years ago, I think it was sold off. So people are just Canadians, for good reason, you could argue, haven't really been fully aware of what is and isn't Canadian, and I think that's going to change over the next few months. But as Abacus Data writes here, Donald Trump has stirred a wave of Canadian nationalism and pride that is rapidly changing the retail and consumer landscape. People want to buy Canadian-made products. They want to reward companies that reflect Canadian values, and they have to become more inclined to punish companies they see as tied too closely to the U.S. market or political sphere. Brands would be wise to keep a close eye on this trend, clarify their origins, and adapt their messages to speak to both the head and the heart of Canadian consumers. And I think you are going to see more of that, more of an intention of Canadian companies to tell people that they are Canadian. Now, when it comes to Americans' view on this, they also are not really into this idea of tariffing Canada. So they're more open to the idea of tariffing Chinese imports, but they are largely opposed to tariffs on Mexico and on Canada. And that's more data from Morning Consult. And also, when it comes to what they want to see, Trump is doing the opposite of what Americans are asking him to do. So few voters want Trump to prioritize tariffs, but that is what many see him doing. So on should be a top priority, only 23% say imposing tariffs on goods imported to the U.S. say that should be a priority. I believe that is the second lowest on this list, second only to expanding the territory of the United States. So Americans are not interested in annexing Canada or anybody else. This is not a priority for Americans for obvious reasons. Why would they want to do that? What they do care about, bringing down the cost of goods and services, that's 79%. So the vast majority here, and clearly the top on the list, bringing down the cost of goods and services. Second is making healthcare more affordable for Americans. That's 73%. What is Trump doing on those two fronts? The opposite. So one of his first moves as president was an executive order to rescind Biden's order aimed at lowering the cost of prescription drugs. So Trump siding with Big Pharma to ensure costs stay high, rescinding one of the few protections that was going to be brought in when it came to the cost of prescription drugs. So already, Trump doing the opposite on healthcare costs, which also applies to how tariffs could impact as well. So Trump tariffs could raise medication costs and exacerbate shortages, drug trade groups warn. And that also applies, of course, to goods generally. The cost of everything based on those tariffs are projected to go up if those tariffs do go through. So the idea of Trump bringing down the cost of healthcare is not happening. In fact, the opposite is happening. And this is stuff that is, not surprising if you were paying attention. If you weren't paying attention and you thought, oh, it couldn't get worse than Biden, well, here you are. It's getting worse, and it's going to get more worse. Last thing here. This is one of the petitions I came across. Empower Canadian consumers, encourage product of Canada labels in our grocery stores. So, petition or not, expect to see more of this. I think there is now, companies aren't dumb. Like, if there's one thing companies know, it's what to do to make money. That's really all they care about. And if they are aware of the moment that we are in, we are going to see more things like this.